Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are tourist guides from the time of Shakespeare. We travel through time to inform you about England, specifically London. The age of Shakespeare was a great time in English history. It was a period where Queen Elizabeth reigned. She lived from 1558 to 1603 and had great power. One of the things she accomplished was the establishment of the Christian Church, which gave the royal family wealth and more power as well. It is safe to say that England under Queen Elizabeth had a solid regime. The time was a great time for England. England had accomplished to be the leading naval and the greatest power of the Western world. England's strength lay first of all in the defeat of the Spanish Navy in 1588, but overall England had the strongest navy and army as well, maybe all over Europe. England was a rich country, but as any other country from this time, there was a big difference between poor and rich in this society. It was divided in north and south. The rich lived on the north side. In the beginning of the 1600s, England began to see interest in the overseas trade and colonization. The meeting with the New World did also have an influence on England. New cultures came to the country and formed a new England. At the same time, England was dominating with their colonies all over the world. In this time, in the English Renaissance, England was rich on culture and artistic movement, with great artists, as our dear friend William Shakespeare.
The Elizabeth era was not only an era with the flowering of poetry, music and literature, but also a time where people all over the country, from poor to rich, from south to north, suffered from terrible diseases. This was not only because of the dirty streets, but also because of the food, medicine and terrible hygiene. The lower classes had a humble, ordinary diet consisting largely of bread, fish, cheese and vegetables, while the upper class had all kinds of meat and fish to choose from. The upper classes did only eat fine white bread and did not eat vegetables because the rich people considered food from the ground as slowly, while they considered meat as a luxury. And bathing was not a thing you often did in this era. The lower class citizens would maybe only bath a few times in a single year. For the upper class, they had a little bit more luxury and were able to bath roughly once every couple of weeks. These conditions and the lack of food were not the only problems. The poor people could not afford to go and see any good doctors if they were sick, and they couldn't afford any of the good medicine the rich people had the possibility to use. Instead, they made homemade medicine of different kinds of herbs, and some even believed that magic could help them. Even though people did what they could to survive, a lot of people died from diseases because of the very bad sanitary conditions.
After having traveled through time and many kilometers away from London town, we discovered that the clothes you wear here in Denmark is a lot different from the clothes we wear in London at the age of Shakespeare. In our time and place, clothing is not just merely an insignificant thing. In fact, it is quite significant that there is even a law related to it. These laws state the colors as well as the type of clothing an individual is allowed to own and wear. These laws are called Statutes of Apparel and are enforced by the Queen herself, Queen Elizabeth that is. The intent is to maintain social structure as well as to keep a firm restraint on the people's expenditure towards clothing. I can see clearly now that this is not how it functions for you in Denmark. Basically, Elizabethan clothing is a part of the social order. It is also an indicator of a particular person's status, not only reflecting how wealthy or poor they are, but also their social reputation. For example, back then, it is absurd for a peasant to copy more well-off individuals through luxurious clothing, which are only worn by upper classes. Everyone, including me, wish they could wear these clothes. The upper class wears elegant and luxurious clothing that are made of expensive velvet, exotic silk, and satin. Only the members of the royal family are allowed to own robes which are trimmed with ermine. Less noble folk wear clothing trimmed with either fox or otter. Quite the contrast to the luxurious clothing of the affluent is the clothing worn by peasants. They wear clothing made of simple materials such as English cotton, wool, and leather. Woolen clothing is in fact quite popular among the working as well as domestic classes, since it is rather cheap and the wool trade is increasing. The brightest colors demands a higher price tag and are only available to the upper class. The brightness of the color and its richness are the determining factors of how expensive it would be. The working class or peasants wear clothes dyed in yellow, orange, green, pale blue, pink, and russet. Clothing for women usually consists of gowns, underclothing, corsets, hats, ruffs, collars, and shoes. The men wear doubles, underclothing, breeches, ruffs, collars, hats, and shoes. Women often wear fancy jewelry, but for both men and women, ruffs are an indispensable item that adds to their elegant look. The Queen herself wears many elaborate colors. The ruffs are worn around the neck or wrists. As you now know, the rich people from where we come from wear clothes that are very elegant compared to your rich people.
At the time of Shakespeare, men and women do not have the same rights and possibilities. Women at this time have little or no control over their destinies. Normally, it is the men who make the choices and the women has to obey. We also see this in the movie Shakespeare in Love, where Viola is promised to another man without being asked. It is a general understanding that women are meant to be childbearers and homemakers. Rarely they have jobs, and generally it's frowned upon by those who work. Women don't have equal opportunities as men. However, they are still respected but recognized as having different responsibilities. To be able to go to school is not a privilege that anyone or anybody can enjoy at our time. First of all, no regular girls or women can get an education. Only boys are allowed to go to school. Just women who are members of the nobility are given education at home. Boys who are aged 5 to 7 are sent to what is referred as a pity school or a dame school. Those schools are in fact no actual schools, but the house of a well-schooled housewife who teaches children in exchange for a small fee. Passages about being a good Christian are also taught. Boys who are older than 7 are joining real schools. Those schools are mainly for grammar education, are subdivided into two, the public and the private. The public schools are intended for both the poor and rich boys. Girls are not allowed in here. On the other hand, the private schools are only for the rich boys. Girls aren't allowed in here either.
In the 1500s there wasn't much to do as an average person, especially if you didn't have lots of money. But one of the things they could do was go and see a play at the local theater, and lots of people made use of this possibility. But the theater was not the only attraction. There was also a very popular sport called jousting.
Did she see me?
Yes, she saw you.
Did she see me take the hit?
Yes, she saw you take the hit.
Or was she concerned?
It was dreadful. Her eyes welled up. It was awful. Caldwell has perfect technique.
Jousting is a basic form of contest. Two knights mounted on horses using long bows. You need to hit the other person 3 times to win, or push him down off the horse. In the evening, it is normal to go to the local pub to get something to drink or to get laid, if you know what I mean. Well, people, I guess there's only one thing left to say.
Yeah.